So welcome to our series 2020, A Year Without Public Space under the COVID-19 pandemic, initiated and organized by Luisa, founder of the Journal of Public Space, and me, Hendrik Tieben, from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. We are now reaching mid-August, and in many places are experiencing new waves of infection, with people coming home from travels or letting down their guards. So please stay alert and responsible. So here, yeah. And, those who have followed our series know that every second Thursday of the month, we organize a special session on innovative approaches and creative practices in response to the pandemic. So also today. So these sessions have seem to have been very popular so far, and I hope that also today's session will be inspiring for you, seeing how people try to face the enormous challenges of the current situation with their creative public space ideas and help to lift up our spirits. Before I pass the word to Luisa, I want to remind you that you can send us your questions anytime during the webinar, and then they will be selected by my colleague Ying Chen and passed to our panelists. You can also get in touch with us via email if you have further questions or if you want to become a panelist. And indeed, today we have a lot of panelists that came in this way to us, and we are very grateful through that because we all learn about new perspectives. If you missed any of our earlier webinars, you can find their videos on our City Space Architecture YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to the channel if you want and get updates. And also, if you have the time, you can also fill in our COVID-19 public space survey if you haven't done so. Also, please already mark in your calendar the following date. In November 6 and 7, we are planning to conclude this series of webinars with a grand 2-day symposium full of discussions and reflections. And details on this will follow soon. So let me now pass the word to Luisa in Bologna for the introduction of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hendrik, and welcome to all attendees and our speakers to this fourth webinar dedicated to innovative approaches and creative practices in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We had 3 previous webinars on this topic, and we see that there is a lot of interest around innovative approaches and creative practices. We are happy to have new speakers coming to us, as Hendrik mentioned, through our call for speakers. And today we have speakers from United Kingdom, from Qatar, from Malaysia, Brazil and Poland, with very different and diverse perspectives and projects related to public space. Each speaker will give a presentation, and later we will have a roundtable discussion. We will also accept questions from the audience, as Hendrik mentioned. Please submit your questions as soon as you have it, even during the presentations of the speakers. We will collect them and we will answer to some of them during the webinar. If you want, you can send us additional questions, as Hendrik mentioned, even after the webinar through the webinar feedback Google form that you can find online. You can also read summaries of previous webinars. We also include sometimes reading materials with links to articles or chapters, publications, and so on. We try to provide some more information regarding what's going on throughout this pandemic at the global level by receiving and publishing information from speakers and affiliated partners of our network. So now I would like to give the floor to the first speaker, David McGillivray from United Kingdom. He's the chair in Event and Digital Cultures at University of the West of Scotland. His research focuses on the contemporary significance of events and festivals as markers of identity and mechanism for the achievements of wider economic, social and cultural externalities. He's the project lead of a pan-European project called FESTSPACE, which explores the relationship between festivals, events and public space in the context of inclusivity. David?
Thank you, Luisa, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen here. There we are. Okay, so as Luisa said, my focus is going to be on the relationship between festivals, events, and some of the creative responses that we've seen during COVID and in the period since some of the measures have been more relaxed. So I work at the University of West of Scotland, as Luisa said, and here are my details for contact. I'm going to talk about some of the context around about a project, a European funded project by HERA called FESTSPACE, which I'm the project lead, and we have partners in 5 European cities. So that's Gothenburg, Glasgow, Dublin, London, and Barcelona. And that project is focused on the relationship between festivals and events and inclusive public space in Europe. And the context of, I guess, this project is set out in some of these discussion points in terms of the sort of pre-COVID relationship between festivals, events and public space. So we have the sense that festivals and events create these special atmospheres that activate public spaces. You see that a lot in the way that we think about urban design, and that festivals and events can give conviviality to perhaps dead space or underused space and increase sociability, make public spaces more people-friendly, attract people to come together, very much celebrations of our diversity of our cities, as well as marking important historical events, something that, again, we've not been able to do during the COVID-19 pandemic. Also produce, of course, significant economic and social value to our urban environments. Of course, there's also been some debate that we've been focused upon, which suggests that there are also some maybe slightly less positive outcomes from festivals and events held in urban spaces, including privatization, commercialization, maybe securitization, but also the erosion of what we see as space that's public for a civic public to use, partly because these activities sometimes are bounded off and obstacles are put in the way of the public accessing those spaces. So there can be a degree of exclusivity around about those spaces. And these were very much the case that we were exploring in the period before COVID. And I know the topic of this is a year without public space, and I guess we're also experiencing a year without festivals and events, and perhaps longer. So we've seen postponements, cancellations, with some exceptions in terms of mass gatherings being able to take place. The places that have hosted, the outdoor public spaces in particular, which is our focus, that have hosted festivals and events have been emptied. The social encounters that have been the basis of why festivals and events have been held often, and one of the main reasons, have also been reduced and been prevented from happening. Some of the kind of key place markers that festivals and events represent for our cities, the kind of hallmark events where we know where that event takes place, which urban environment, because of the nature of the event. Edinburgh festivals cancelled, postponed for this period. Glastonbury Music Festival postponed, and of course many others around the world. And there's that context where the health measures that are still in place, the social distancing in particular, continue to threaten not just the festival sector, but also the way in which they interact and use the public spaces of our cities. So the creative response, what have we seen happening, and what might that mean for the way we understand festivals and their role as well as public space? Well, we saw, especially early on in the period of COVID, a very spontaneous public happenings, public gatherings, public reactions. And these are a wide range of those, and each of your environments will have some great examples of those. But balcony festivals, outdoor streets performances, streets being being turned over into environments where people can come together at a distance and still have a degree of some solidarity and community being enhanced through that process. And very much people-oriented, people-initiated. These were a response to the situation that everyone found themselves in. Much more, as I said, much more spontaneous and not organised by any institutional actors. We've also seen, and many people will have experienced, the move from offline to online festivities, the digital mediation of already existing events. Festival organisers, the industry responding and providing access to their artistic, sporting or other activities online, where people can continue to access the art, comedy or whatever, but outside of what we would see as traditional public spaces. Adaptation of existing events to a socially distanced environment. So we're already beginning to see, new spaces being used for festival and events in airfields, in large areas, perhaps even of parks now, where we see the social distance events taking place. And these are often, I think, quite commercially driven by key actors in the sector, looking to return to some degree of normality in accessing public spaces and doing so. And also, all of these, if you like, are also supported by what we've seen in terms of the institutional response, adaptations, changes and uses of public space to facilitate more festivity and celebration, but also within the context of the health measures that we have. So festivities indoors being taken outdoors, outdoor arts in particular in the UK beginning to return because of the context of our understanding of the health agenda, that outdoors is preferable to indoors. So extending of public realm, extending of spaces to be used for some festivity and outdoor entertainment, and to enable a return of sector, but also to enable people to have the benefit of interacting and having the sociability that we expect and we desire, the belonging and the coming together that festivals and events provide. And within my minute that I have left, it's also worth reflecting on some of the outcomes of this and what the longer term consequences may be of the COVID experience and the responses, the creative responses that we've seen across the world. I think there's a reinforcement, a reorientation towards smaller, more localized, place-specific festivities, neighborhoods, localities, localism becoming more important. That we've all appreciated our environments around about our neighborhoods more probably in this period, and that provides probably a real opportunity to more effectively use underused or underappreciated public spaces close to home for more localized forms of festivity. That, of course, in itself also reflects on the larger scale events and activities which are more difficult, so more carefully selected large events and maybe a re-evaluation of those that we want, where we want to host them and what public spaces we may wish to host these in. Undoubtedly a development of kind of a hybridized models with digital and physical coming together, reimagining what we might see as the contours of a festival. And we're certainly seeing that, for example, in Edinburgh at the moment. Edinburgh Festival is looking to adapt its practice, and some of that will remain, some of that will actually extend the reach of the festivals. And finally, financially, a whole kind of range of issues around about membership or support models to sustain and enable some form of risk-taking in the festival and events context still to take place alongside important state support. Look forward to discussing more of these issues in the forthcoming question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Actually, in Italy, where I'm currently based, we had an unprecedented situation. The Venice Architecture Biennale was postponed to 2021. And everyone was like shocked, but I mean, this was inevitable because the Biennale is an international event, so you cannot actually arrange such a big event with international guests if actually there is no possibility to travel, no possibility to set up all conditions for the exhibition to happen. So we are longing to see what will happen next year, since the pandemic is still affecting our country, and we are currently discussing about the second wave in September or October. So hopefully the Biennale will be confirmed next year. We will see. So now we move to Qatar, and we have our speaker Ali Alraouf, which is an architect, urban designer and planner, interested in research and practice related to comprehensive sustainable architecture and urban design, sociability of public spaces and human-centric urbanity. Ali was a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley and held permanent and visiting research and teaching positions in many universities. He presented in his research work at international institutions in over 30 countries. He is the recipient of grants and awards, and currently is a leader of Green Urbanism Group at the Qatar Green Building Council and board member of ISOCARP, the International Society of City and Regional Planners. Ali?
Thank you. Can see it now?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
Okay.
You can put it in full screen mode. Yes,
there you go.
Fine.
Okay. So thank you so much. And because of the element of time, I want to be quick. So I want to start this narrative. I want to share with you a story. And before sharing the story, let me emphasize a couple of personal positions. The first one is that I have an unlimited belief in human capacity. And therefore, although a lot of people are talking about we have to be prepared for the new normal, I would look at history and I would see that humans were able to overcome a lot of severe challenges. So I think the value of COVID-19 is that it's suggesting new ways of looking at our challenges, a new way to reconsider and revisit some of the components, particularly of the built environment. The second personal position is that I am in deep love with the trilogy of museums, public spaces, and people. And a lot of my research and my consultancy is related to this trilogy. And I think museums are moving, particularly in the last decade, from only being a place to preserve heritage or valuable art to be a sort of a main pillar in the whole issues of social justice, democracy, manifestation of human rights, and also contribution in knowledge and creative economy. And what's interesting in my research, when you even go back to the classical old notion of museums, you would realize that it was not only an institution to preserve aspects of heritage, but actually it was like a university. It was a place for people to get together. It was a sort of a melting pot or a confrontation arena for scholars and researchers. Therefore, I am more excited about the social and political roles of the museums. And I saw it as a sort of a two-way kind of dialogue. A dialogue where you see the city as a museum and also the museum as a city. And in this sense, how to transform the museum into the new public space, the new agora, the new place where it can play a role as a force for democracy, connecting people, and also creating a sort of a safe and respectable place for people to gather and talk about their cities. And also the city itself can be a museum in the sense that particularly every single public space, including streets and parks and squares and so on and so forth, can contribute in this notion of looking at the city as an open museum, not for tourists or travelers, but also for the dwellers, and how this would create an interesting sense of belonging. And I've noticed also during my research that some interesting cases, including Tate Modern in London, we started to see that the external boundaries of the museum are started to become very blurred, inviting city dwellers to come in. So suddenly the main lobbies, the main entrance halls of those museums are becoming extension of the public space, are becoming extension of the street. and people are sitting and wedding and talking and even having picnic, as if this is becoming a sort of a new vibrant place, vibrant public space. A more classical case would be Centre Pompidou in Paris, where the plaza in front of the center is becoming a gateway to the center, and also the center is extending its energy towards the plaza. Now, when I moved to Qatar, and as you can see, Qatar is a very small country within the GCC, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council. Its main economy is based on the availability of gas and oil. But we did realize that this is not gonna help us in considering the future. So we started to move a bit to consider the whole notion of knowledge-based economy, because we have to question the future of the country. We have to question the pace of development. And speaking of pace of development, this is Qatar in 1937, when it was a small traditional fisherman village. And this is Qatar now. And you can see the projection of the village in this small square here. So you see with me the scale of development that is asking us to pause and see and evaluate this direction of almost unlimited development. And therefore, the decision was made to move more into knowledge-based urban development as a new paradigm in architecture, planning, and urbanism, and considering the city. The lower book to the right, Knowledge-Based Urban Development in the Middle East, I published 2 years ago, where I was trying to sort of shed light on the main features of this paradigm, particularly in the Gulf countries, which are totally based on oil and gas. Within this idea of moving to knowledge economy, a lot of Gulf cities started to build museums. Signature architects were brought to the area, including the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. And the story that I want to focus on here is the MIA, the Museum of Islamic Art in Qatar, designed by the famous I.M. Pei. And it was a great story that he has no idea about Islamic art and architecture, but he was willing to be engaged in a trip around the Islamic world from Morocco to Iran and China, where he was inspired particularly by the geometry of different places and mosques and sawqalas and so on. And we ended up with a very interesting icon for culture and intellectuality and art, and it's in a very unique position in the city. And it creates a sort of a dialogue between the museum and the city. But we also realized that the educational component is important. So we started to have different kind of spaces that would connect the museum to educational also quarters. But what also was interesting here is to invest more on relating people to the museum, invest more on connecting the museum to the city. And when I say connections here, I'm not only talking about intellectual connections, but also physical connection, how to make the museum accessible, how to make the museum part of the journey of people within the city. But the most exciting point that I want to share with you today is the idea of how to contextualize concepts, how to understand the social context. I have an admission for all of you. In this part of the world, we are not museum goers. We don't have the same embedded culture like you have it in London or Milan or Paris. So the idea was, instead of focusing only in the museum, let's create a dialogue between a series or a sequence of public and green spaces and the museum, and create a sort of a vibrant kind of pace of events and parties and carnivals and celebrations, including souks, bazaars, including museum music concerts. And those music concerts, in some cases, you can have it within the museum, but also you can spill it out to the outdoor public spaces and public areas. And therefore, suddenly you have a sort of a very strong connection between the public space and the sophisticated cultural place. And I think here, this is the innovative part that I'm suggesting for the future of public spaces, particularly when they are related or connected or adjacent to museums and cultural facilities. And even during the COVID-19, with the right measurement between tables and so on and so forth, you start to use some of those public spaces to create a very interesting balcony towards the city. And also how to allow people with their different kind of products, artifacts, artwork to be exhibited within the spaces, and again, very strongly connected to the museum. This is my very final picture, and it's a true story. I took this picture for this family because when I was doing my interviews in the public spaces adjacent to the museum, I asked this family about their relation to the museum. And the father told me that we are enjoying the public spaces and green spaces here on a weekly basis. And one day my son asked me, "What this big building over there?" And I told him, I have no idea. So we walked to the museum and we realized that it's a museum and it's for free. And therefore, it's becoming a routine. We go on a weekly basis to enjoy the place. And hence, suddenly you did realize that going to the museum is becoming a byproduct of going to the public space. And I think this is the innovative part that we should consider to revive and revisit our relation to public spaces in the post-COVID-19 paradigm. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ali. I think it's very important that you remind us that public space is not just the open urban space, but it is also embedded in some specific public buildings like museums or other facilities like libraries, for example. And there is a growing interest actually to explore these new public facilities. And I would say thank you also for giving us a perspective related to Qatar, because I understand that museums play a different role in the Middle East as part of the urban settings. We should talk more about this. Hopefully there will be another opportunity in the future. So now we move to Malaysia, and we have Clarissa Lim, who is an architectural designer and researcher based in Kuala Lumpur, working in the intersection between visual culture, art, and architecture. She is currently a scholar from the Hubs for Good program, funded by the British Council Cultural Centre at University of Malaya, and Yayasan Sime Darby, investigating the notion of a creative hub. She previously worked at the Urban Ecologies Design Lab, Community Project Workshop, and she studied at the University of Hong Kong, the University of Malaya, Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, and University of Bicocca in Milan, Italy. Clarissa?
Hello. Hi, everyone. So wait, let me share my screen. Great. Can everyone see it?
Yes. Well, now we see, yes, now it is coming.
Perfect. So thank you for having me today. Now we shift on to Southeast Asia. Today I'll be exploring, within the short span of the 7 minutes I was given, the creative and cultural initiatives within today's Malaysia, which sits precariously on the interstices between socially distanced physical realm and the smoothness of the virtual screen, which the bounded nation does not simply abide to. The slippages between the governing bodies and the disparate moving parts of our art and cultural ecosystem is further highlighted by the lack of public knowledge, support, and awareness of these practices that even our current Minister of Tourism, Art and Culture, yes, it is lumped together into one portfolio, struggle with identifying this absolute and immediate loss of income, opportunity, and space for public engagement and practice. So I will speak about the immediate remediation, or lack thereof rather, and the response on the governmental level, shifting to the practices on the ground to document, engage, and work around the current pandemic and the public sphere, known as the internet. and begin to tie these practices within the global networks, which the public space of the internet allows for, which I am no expert on, but must address in our current day and reality. So imagine 1 month before the pandemic, a sudden change in government happened on the 21st of February, 2020. New people were suddenly in charge of new portfolios, compounded by the scramble to get the country ready for the to-be pandemic, and concurrently attempting to understand the needs and wants on the ground, facilitated by a love for bureaucracy, further divides the ministry and the arts and cultural workers. The movement control order, a partial lockdown in the country, was set in place on the 18th of March 2020, and thus slowly released until today. We're in a state of recovery, movement control order, whatever that may mean. Living in the shadow of the sudden confusing change of government, Minister Nancy Shukri, the new Minister of Tourism, Art and Culture, which now I'll call MOTAC because it's very long, was interviewed on Astro Awani, a national TV channel, on the 24th of April. She said that the arts would be the quickest to recover and that COVID-19 was a blessing in disguise. Many arts and cultural workers were dissatisfied with her performance and knowledge of the community, or lack thereof of knowledge of the community. So some responses included Reformatsi, as you can see here on the screen, an informal coalition of arts and cultural workers, collectively put on a statement titled Arts for Malaysians, not just for tourists, in April 28th, 2020, 4 days after the fated interview. The statement to the press cited Nancy Shukri's focus on digitalization aspects of art and cultural work, echoing the intention of like a previous 2009 national creative industry policy that was put into effect. She indicated that online competitions and the need for full-on live performance in the digital medium is sufficient for the arts and culture, and this lack of distinction between the two, digital and creative, appears to have clouded the judgment of the ministry yet again. So much later, now it's August, so 5th of June, the government put out a short-term economic recovery plan, Penjana, budgeted at 225 million ringgit, which is about 53 million US dollars, put to, again, the Malaysian Digital Economy Corporation, which is for digital uses, but apparently it's supposed to be for arts and cultural. Cultural and Economy Development Agency, and My Creative Ventures. So you can see here, finally we're acknowledged. So moving on, shifting to the ground, a cultural worker and artist, Okwe Lala, who was in talks with various community members, start to engage on the first kind of example of the public space. This is a Google Sheet that tabulated 174 events which were postponed or cancelled, and it started on the 16th of March 2020. This was circulated around to WhatsApp groups, social media groups, and phone books, which most of Malaysia lives by. And yeah, up to today, it's not really added to because we have now opened several other venues, but this was like the first instance where we all came together. And as we move away from this kind of larger kind of scope, we shift to individual practices that started to use the internet as a kind of public space, as I argue for. So this is a Duduk Rumah artist, which is stay-at-home artists. Together, the 5 of them came together for this short period of time, and almost like an instant festival. And from between April 2nd to May 13th, they raised a total of 20,000 ringgit, which is about 4.7 thousand US dollars to provide for COVID-19 relief efforts. So, and beyond this instant network, they have since closed, they connect with people making music videos to politicians and engaging with a network of artists beyond this particular initiative. You can learn more about it if you go on their website. Another one, shifting a bit more wider to this is a festival Duduk Rumah that lasted for maybe about 2 months, as you can see here. And they collated all sorts of musicians and just put it online, on live, and raised money again for the COVID-19 relief efforts. Shifting to an online medium as a platform or a space that people can really engage and perform in. And this is Unrestricted Stage, which is an even more wider scope, which is a festival programmed by the community for the community themselves. It started on the 21st of March until today. They program every single weekend for people to kind of do whatever they want. they can draw art, they can talk about anything, as long as they email the facilitators. And these are examples which I think, which are kind of like instant initiatives that were put together online. Finally, there are these kind of community catch-ups facilitated by Penang Art District, which is a state kind of governing body, which facilitated art community discussions to have direct discussion with government workers, such as Izan Satrina, which is part of Cendana, as I introduced before, and also part of this Penang State Exco for Tourism Development, Arts and Cultural Heritage. So here is a kind of like opening it up to have engagement with the people, and everyone are welcome to join in at any point, at any time. Following this, they also gave the Zoom account. The Penang Art District gave the Zoom account to everyone to use because it is expensive here for Malaysians. That's another form of kind of like, engaging with the community, giving it out to people. So, but then before we kind of use the internet as just a leeway and a kind of shortcut to become public sphere, we must acknowledge the fact that scholarship on the internet as a public sphere is also kind of limiting due to the fact that even though 80 to 90% of Malaysians are said to have internet access via a smartphone device, the quality of this access is not a statistic that is available for us. And it only alluded to a smartphone device, not necessarily a computer or a laptop, therefore failing the initial intent of what the minister wanted, to shift everything online. It would really affect our experience. And I think that's important to kind of think about the quality of like using these online platforms. How would this kind of affect how we engage with people online? Not everyone has a laptop here. You can see here, most of Malaysia is the normalized landmass color, which means that they don't have access to very good internet. And it's only on the urban nodes or urban spaces. So yeah, that's my research thus far. I'm part of this larger project called Creative Hubs in Malaysia, and we are funded as Luisa kindly introduced me. And we are tabulating and collecting data on what we call creative hubs, which I call arts and cultural collectives within the context of Malaysia, and to kind of analyze and kind of do an overall mapping of it. So this is what the project that I'm part of is, and we are still just starting out. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarissa, for giving us an idea of what's happening now in your part of the world. And indeed, the internet is actually the means through which we are trying to resemble conditions for interaction and then resembling dynamics that actually take place in physical public spaces. But of course it is different, and there is also some feeling of frustration because of the access to the internet, as you explained, but also because actually the experience of meeting others just in front of a screen is not exactly the same from a real experience in a real public space, meeting people face to face. But we have to deal with the current condition, and it's important to actually highlight creative approaches that through the internet are creating new public environments that are potentially intended to be easy to access. We are all on this page trying to create this kind of environments, so it is important that we learn from what's already happening. So thank you for sharing with us this experience. Now we move to Lisbon, to Portugal, where Laura Sobral is currently based, even if she's from São Paulo in Brazil. Laura holds a bachelor and master degree in architecture and urbanism from the University of São Paulo. She was a German Chancellor Fellow with the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung. She's currently in Lisbon doing her PhD. Laura is one of the founders of the City Needs You Institute, an organization that improves public spaces through social actions, such as publications, projects, seminars, workshops, and other activities. She's the author of the book, Doing It Together, Cooperation Tools for the City Co-Governance. Laura is also a board member of FESTSPACE Architecture. Laura?
Yeah. Thank you, Luisa. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to talk to you all. Should I share my screen? Okay, let's go.
Please. Yes,
good.
Fine. Yes.
Okay. So, well, that's basically about innovative approaches and practices in the current situation we are living. Here. One thing that I believe that is very familiar to this Southern thinking is to do what you need with simply in people and the available resources. That's pretty straightforward, but it takes a lot of creativity. And I'm sure that during the pandemics, this kind of skills were really important to deal with this situation that just took everyone, well, surprised everyone actually. So I want to say that we have a kind of a word, this gambiaha, that the closest concept I found so far. It's MacGyverism or MacGyvering, which is just kind of trying to find concrete solutions of challenges and that you have in your daily life by just improvising methods and using any available material. Now, of course, it pre-connects to tactical urbanism, which we talk about using light, cheap, and quick solutions to urban challenges, and it also happened a lot and is happening actually because Brazil is just with a very, very difficult political situation, and people are really having to improvise just to survive. Here in Portugal is a bit better in the sense, but still it's happening. One very important aspect of this improvisation is the solidarity networks that just appeared during the COVID, the ones that are physical and the ones that are digital. They were completely essential to maintain any kind of social exchange between people, and also to support people that really are vulnerable in this moment. One very nice example is from Paraisópolis. It's a slum, it's a favela in São Paulo with 70,000 people. So I mean, it's a whole city basically, and of course they are pretty much suffering with the situation, since yeah, of course basic urban services are not available there, and the state is not there as a provider, but rather as an oppressor. So yeah, people really need to improvise to get going. They had a very successful idea inside this solidarity networks concept, which is street presidents. So they elected kind of 420 volunteers, one person per street, more or less. It was every president was taking care of more or less 50 homes. There still are taking care of 50 homes and monitoring the cases, organizing food, primarily healthcare, and also fighting fake news, because in Brazil, a lot of people, including the president, they say the coronavirus is not really something that people should worry about. What for sure makes everything much worse. So it's important to fight any kind of fake news in this sense. So with this street presidents program, but that was basically self-managed from the community side, they had better results from than the rest of the municipality in general. So yeah, they had like the mortality rate was death rate was 21.7 per 100 people, 1,000 people, but yeah. And that is less than half than the municipal average. So that's pretty something, just to say that, of course, that technology and wealth could be very useful for in this situation, but really the solidarity and creativity of people could be very, very helpful in this kind of situations. Many other networks of this kind are popping up or were popping up around the world. I got to know one in Aveiro, which is here in Portugal. It's not the same thing, but also neighbors organizing themselves to give support for people that need to in a smaller scale, but also Frena la Curva. I don't know if you heard about it, but it's a Spanish digital initiative, which is kind of a citizen platform where people could say what they need, and then some people could also volunteer for helping, and basically just gathering this information about solidarity networks and how could people help themselves. So it's about local initiatives, but also with global reach, because this Frena la Curva actually it was translated for many languages, and now it's covering a lot of cities doing such a thing. So just to say that this solidarity networks are very important in the moment, from the physical ones to the digital ones, and also from the local ones to the global networks that that connects them in a way. Of course, this making for emergency is really important. Also, in the same mindset, and for example in Brazil. But also in many other countries, I know some from Africa and also Latin America, that a lot of people organize themselves to put sinks in the streets. You can see how people improvise at this sink close to a food place, a street food place, so people could wash their hands and so on, and still kind of keep going with their lives. For sure, these people are not probably in their homes because they can't. They need to work every day to survive. So it's a very precarious situation. And yeah, as Luisa mentioned, I'm part of the City Needs You Institute, that is a SEO from São Paulo. And we are connected to another SEOs from all over the country in the Brazilian network for collaborative urbanism. And yeah, we try to organize ourselves in some action, and some of the collectives and groups, parts of the network, are also putting this these sinks. These ones were organized by Laboratório da Cidade in Belém, which is in Pará in the Amazon. It's in the north of Brazil. But some people from for example, from the extreme south also, from Porto Alegre, Translab Urbi also did something in this direction, actually putting things in streets. Of course, it's really important to have this first spontaneous and quick reaction for what is happening, so people can survive and keep going in a way. But of course, one of the main challenges we have now is just the maintenance of all of these. It's not very sustainable in financially or time-wise, actually. So and also how it could, for example, be kind of a public policy, or even kind of something more related to the country infrastructure per se, in terms of scale. But yeah, I just wanted to bring this southern kind of reactions to what is happening, and hopefully we will use our creativity on something less less dangerous soon. So, well, thank you. Here is my contact. As Luisa said, I'm a PhD candidate in the ISOCARP here in Lisbon, and also in TUV in Austria, and part of the City Needs You Institute. We are happy to connect with you and exchange ideas. Well, thanks.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you for telling us about these efforts from the bottom up in some critical contexts. We saw this also in other webinars. People are self-organized, actually. And it is important also to remind that solidarity is one of the main value that we are experiencing during these difficult times in public space and also in domestic spaces. So thank you for this very important reminder. Also because, as we said from the very beginning, one of the main measures was to wash hands. And we sometimes take for granted this very simple act that we do several times during the day. But in some countries and in some cities, washing hands is not so simple. And so there must be some kind of bottom-up, as you said, activities from non-profit organizations or from institutions that care for vulnerable groups and vulnerable communities that can support this kind of activities to flatten the curve, as you mentioned from that Spanish initiative. So very important that we understand that it's not just about us, this is global, and everything that's happening at the global level is also having an impact on us at the local level. So now we move to Poland, to Magdalena Rembesa, who is an architect, urban planner and researcher. Assistant professor at the Gdańsk University of Technology in Poland. She is also a member of a board of Revitalization Forum Association, which was founded in 1999 as a place of integration of those involved in revitalization. Her research interests lie in revitalization of contemporary public spaces and also in transformation of place identity as an effect of art interventions. Magdalena?
Thank you, Luisa. Thank you, Hendrik, for the invitation. It is my pleasure to be a part of this event, and I'm going to share my presentation with you in a moment. Hopefully you see my screen. So
Yes.
as my former panelists, I've also presented some cases connected with innovative approaches and creative practices in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but I want to show you some examples from Poland. I think we already know that pandemic has changed the way people function in public space. On the one hand, it brought anxiety and depression, but I think also individualized the experience of the disease, forced people to isolate themselves, and brought the risk of further atomization. But on the other hand, the pandemic also allows us to see more clearly political, economic, ecological, and artistic alternatives. Alliances were formed before our eyes, so we can see a new initiatives, activist models were created. There were social and democratic solutions that emerged. Actually, that can be used to create a different model of public space and city. But the pandemic also forced us to ask the questions. For me, as an urban planner and architect, there were two main questions: how city and its public space will evolve and should change, and what is or should be the new role of art in public space. And I see it from my perspective rather as a possibility, not as a lost chance, and I'm going to prove that in this short presentation. So I prepared some case studies locations from Poland, mainly from Warsaw, from capital, but also from Gdynia, Tree City, where I came from, and Szczecin and Sosnowiec, just briefly because of the time. So first, very interesting initiative that took place in Warsaw was where murals will be fine, giving hope. These were the ideas for the slogans were selected from the proposals of the Good Looking Studio, and the murals were created in parallel. They were on display on several weeks, and the main aim was to give hope to people during difficult time, during lockdown, where people were not able to go to work, or they have to work in a distance. So they were 4 murals presented in a very city center of Warsaw, with different quotation, like Warsaw, it will be still beautiful, or heads up, Warsaw, it will be fine. But I think that the artist itself gives the most, let's say, interesting answer to this question. We feel that there is an overflow of negative information, black statistics, and visions of post-pandemic crisis in the media of all kinds. Therefore, we wanted to give the inhabitants of Warsaw something positive, a light at the end of the tunnel, and hope for a better tomorrow. We have painted simple and huge slogans on our best walls in the center of Warsaw. The background of the slogans was supposed to be optimistic, expressive, and lively. So here are some more examples from the same project. As you can see, they are implemented in a city center of the capital. And actually, they were giving hope to people, especially in this difficult time. The second initiative was a mural, actually very well known in this time. It was the mural created in thanks to doctors, nurses, and representative of all medical professionals helping during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the same as before project, this one arose a considerable interest around the world. This Warsaw mural is actually a beautiful initiative in which a lot of people got involved. One of the media companies came up with an idea and decided to express a big thank you to medical staff. And artists from Good Looking Studio who deal with professional painting of murals were invited to cooperate. This Tamka 37 housing community also decided to join the action by making one of the walls of the buildings available. So here we've got also public participation in this artistic action. Everyone involved in the project resigned from their share of honorarium. Like this kind of action was a kind of giving gratitude to people who actually served us in this difficult time. The next example was a kind of rising awareness towards people, inhabitants of different cities, to wear masks. Because it was a problem in some cities that people avoid wearing masks, even if from April it was mandatory in public spaces, also in closed building, to wear masks. And from April 14th, there are 2 buses running around Gdynia with large masks on the front. In doing so, the city is promoting the use of face masks, which are mandatory in public spaces nationwide. But of course, in the public space, you can see much more references to the coronavirus pandemic and the obligation to wear masks. And in other cities in Poland, like in Szczecin, a bus was painted by employees of the bus company in the front with a mask. And this was also a kind of thank you for people who sue and donate protective masks to the health service and city residents. This kind of initiative, connected again with wearing a mask, was implemented in other Polish cities. For example, in Sosnowiec or in Gdynia, the wearing of masks was promoted by very familiar inhabitants of the city or of Poland by implementing the face mask onto the statues. So here you see the examples. But very important and I think interesting example was the competition called Public Space in Times of Plague. And here you can see the final project, the project that won. It was work by Julia Piwowarska and Marta Kwiatek. And it was a manual neighborhood communicator. And the jury appreciated this idea very much because of building and strengthening social bonds in the community. This competition was actually organized by the Design Institute in Kielce, and it was a very simple idea to give space in a kind of organized space for people who wanted to give help, and they were just giving their telephone number and writing, I will help with pleasure, I will do you shopping, and giving their telephone number. Actually, young people were very much involved in this project because they feel they can help old people in simple everyday life, shopping or other things. This competition consisted of 2 stages and everything was actually thanks to internet platform. It was individual evaluation, but also consultation via internet platform. And just to conclude, because of very short time, art in public space during COVID-19 pandemic is a tool for actually for my perspective, giving a hope, and these were examples from Warsaw or from Gdynia, also strengthening a growing awareness, which was very important at the beginning of the pandemic, because people were actually or were not aware how to behave in public spaces. But another aspect was enhancing social integrity and connection. And this was the last project I was presenting. And from public space and social integration, it was really important. And the last, not least, very important, expressing gratitude, giving our thanks to people who actually were working very, very hard to bring hope and help to the others. There are a lot of lessons learned, but for me, I think three are very important. That grassroots artistic initiative in public space really matter. So even if they are spontaneous actions or random actions, they can really give a new meaning to public space. A positive arts message in public space is needed during a pandemic. And as the artist expression I was quoted, bring this, that we need this positive aspect of life during the time which was terrifying us, at least at the beginning. So art was a tool that could bring it in a very good way. And the last one, that art interventions in public space can also be tool for further well-targeted transformations of public space in future. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Magdalena, for this perspective from Poland. Actually, what you described is also happening in other cities, not just in Europe, but also in North America, as some of the speakers also told us during previous webinars. I think we actually had a very good overview from different projects, different initiatives, different cities from the world. And I was taking notes while you were speaking. And actually, I think that all your presentations have 4 keywords in common. Resilience, solidarity, creativity, and hope. And these keywords are intended to keep physical and intellectual human connections during the pandemic, now that it is almost very difficult, let's say, to be in touch with others as we were used to do in the past. There is a possibility to be in touch with others, but those restrictions are creating many limitations to the way we are used to be in the public domain and to be in touch with others. And since this webinar is about innovative approaches and creative practices, I would like to share with the audience an article that I was reading in the past days in preparation of this meeting. I can put the link of the article here in the chat, I think, or maybe in the Q&A. No, where can I put this? In the all panelists? How can I reach the audience?
Yes, you already posted to the all panelists, and
okay, thanks.
I can put like for the audiences. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. And this is a translation from an article related to the condition and activities of artists in Chile. And if you read at the beginning of this article, there is a very nice quotation from the American writer and novelist Toni Morrison. She wrote, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. This is how civilizations heal." I think this is, of course, very inspiring, and we understand, I think, now during the pandemic, the very significant role of public space for our everyday life, but also the role of these creative practices and art-based initiatives that are in the public domain and that during this period are actually bringing messages, trying to establish a new awareness or to reinforce policies related to social distancing. So my question for the speakers is, what do you think about these four keywords: resilience, solidarity, creativity, and hope? And how do you think that artists and creatives can actually help to implement new ways of understanding, living, and empowering public space for future of our cities? I know it's a very difficult question, so, but the idea is to share reflections and to discuss together. I'm not expecting solutions. Yes, David, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are really good questions, very challenging questions. I think the only thing, I think we need to be both critical as well as optimistic about the potential. So I think the potential of art and what we've seen actually with art and creative practice over the course of the pandemic has been wonderful. In the context where I'm coming from, in the context of festivals, there's what's really interesting is that there's also a kind of significant risks associated with the nature of how festivals have developed into quite institutionalized activities. Reliant on funding in such a way that actually without that funding coming from a public purse or perhaps through some of the models that I mentioned, then actually there's a real threat to the type of art and creative practices that we encounter, the sorts of things that we might engage with in public space, because the models that these festivals often have been working to have been yet completely dependent upon public purse or kind of other ways of generating some money. So I think there's some really interesting things coming from that. So there's going to be clearly uncertainty. There's agendas around about employment practices and precarity for artists, which have become very, very real to people, and probably, I hope, made people feel that actually we need to support this world more effectively, because what happened in the pandemic is that all those forms, especially performing arts indoors, was just ceased. So there's going to be longer term kind of review of models and ways of working, and also I think I really focus on broader social outcomes. So I know in the context of our Edinburgh festivals, for example, talking about those in Scotland, they're recognizing the need to be more socially meaningful. So rather than just growing and becoming big, institutionalized, maybe even overly commercialized, travel-focused events, the kind of importance of locality, the importance of broader social benefits are going to be built into the way in which these festivals events move forward. And that actually may make them more open to public funding, because they are actually able to demonstrate the real value socially, culturally, that these activities can make. So there's optimism, but I think there's also a critical context to understand how the business and the kind of the sector of arts and creativity are currently funded and supported.
Yes, Clarissa, please.
Hi. So almost as a response to that, the fact that the arts and culture is not necessarily funded in countries such as Southeast Asia, people have found their own innovative ways to kind of circumvent all of these obstacles that were initially confounded upon. And I think it's quite interesting, this idea of resilience and solidarity. So for example, the Duduk Rumah artists, which I've kind of talked about, what they do is like to find ways to kind of give back to the COVID-19, for example, medical frontline workers quickly and efficiently. And another way of kind of creativity that I found that's interesting is looking at digital fabrication labs and how they have created their own networks amongst themselves, especially in the context of Southeast Asia. to kind of find creative notions to multiply this idea of bottom up, where they connect all of these labs together and directly fund and give these masks. As you have seen, probably they use 3D printing to fabricate these masks and give it directly to the hospitals. And they have created like a website for all of this kind of initiatives to be put online publicly, transparently, for everyone to see where their money has gone. So I find without the institution, without the government, they have all of these things and the tools right there for them. And it's important that it should be also shown and also explored and exhibited. But this idea of proliferation, or the constant act of making and production of creativity that you have just talked about, David, like the festival's just doing for the sake of doing a festival. There's this idea of discourse and criticality that is emerging, especially in Indonesia. How, for example, like institutions like Good School and Ruang Rupa, now they're going to those kinds of creativity and hope. That's what they have been like talking about with their online medium, using Instagram lives, using Facebook lives. So those are the spaces.
You know, Luisa, can I
Yes.
contribute to this?
Please,
It's
please.
a lovely question. And you know, Luisa, although I am an academic person and researcher and whatever, but I have a very interesting way to examine terminologies, which is basically not how it's perceived within our academic or researchers kind of group, but for regular people. And therefore, the 4 key words that you have talked about, although all of us one way or another, we have used it, but I subscribe more to creativity and hope. And particularly in our time now, during the pandemic, or trying to envision the post-COVID-19 pandemic, I think these are the 2 real keywords. And I would use what Laura and Magdalena presented in their wonderful presentations. I mean, the notion of scale in Laura's presentation, where you only provide a water accessibility for people in the favela, where they would have the hope that they can be able to wash their hands and feel that they are safe to interact with their families. So here, the creativity and hope are sort of integrated together to contact or to speak to people coming from unprivileged situations. And also in Magdalena's presentation, I was so moved with the idea of using a wall within a housing project, and then maybe ask a couple of local artists to draw something that would end up with maybe they spend 300 or 400 euros to get paints and whatever, but you ended up with something that it's creative, it's giving hope to the community, and it's also sending a sort of appreciation message to doctors and medical teams and whatever. So I would subscribe more to creativity and hope. Thank you, Luisa.
Thank you, Ali. You want to say something, Magdalena? Yes.
Yes, maybe just a short comment regarding the last answers. I think that for me, when I was preparing this presentation, very important was the positive aspect of all the actions that took place in public space. Because I was also a person who suffered from isolation, who suffered from actually the lack of public space, and I realized how much it is important for me. And I think in every crisis, we should look for good sides. And I think the good side was, or is, that we much appreciate public space. And I'm not only talking about professionals, because I was talking a lot with my colleagues and friends, and they were stressing this, that they lack a simple city. I mean, places that they can come together, meet together. And of course, it's nothing new that I'm telling, but I think when you try to understand how important public space is, not only for professional, but for every person in a city, it becomes so important to look and investigate how it should be developed, what is important for us as people who are living in a public space, but also who are using this public space, not only as a place of representation of artistic strategies, but first of all, as a place where we are close to each other and we can share our thoughts, our hopes. And for me, the first project that I was presenting that were bringing hope to people was really something that I was also looking for as an ordinary person that was going under lockdown during this difficult time. Thanks.
Yes, Laura?
Yeah, I think, yeah, a lot was said. I feel that I'm completely aligned. But also I think that it's interesting to reflect that this kind of emergence and creative reactions are super important. But sometimes southern countries get kind of judged by this kind of reactions or they're judged badly, or kind of they're on the other side, they can be romanticized when it's about kind of survival and quickly reacting to something, which is, I think it's valuable because it makes things happen, which is obviously the most important part. But it's just that's why I just brought the maintenance in the end, or the public policy, because really this connection between valuing something which is a quick reaction, a creative reaction, but also understanding that it's part of a broader question, and how it can kind of how can it inform administrations about something, and then something can be done. Because yeah, when I hear sometimes people talking about slums, rather it's kind of how terrible it is, how can they live like that, or it's just like how beautiful they work in community because they do everything together. I mean, they do everything together because they don't have personal space or public space. I mean, it's I think it's critical. It should be seen as a paradox as it is. So I think it's very useful to have this kind of knowledge and to value this kind of actions nowadays, because we are living in a permanent crisis. So that's know-how, let's say, to improvise and to make things work. It doesn't matter what. It's a great thing, but also to be able to consolidate things and really take it to a next level. I mean, politically, it's really important to have this perspective. So just this comment.
Yes, in fact, other speakers in previous webinars actually reminded us that in some context the situation was bad even before the pandemic. So, and the condition of public space as well was not so clearly supported by governments and local authorities. In some countries, public space is not clearly understood. It is underused, underdesigned, sometimes abused, I would say. And so this notion of public space, actually, it is not so clear as it should be. And in fact, I would like to mention a recent initiative from UN Habitat that is willing to redefine public space. There is a document now that I think is a draft that started to circulate among partners of UN Habitat. So we received it as city space architecture. And so this idea that actually we have to constantly revise and update what we understand as public space, what are the meanings behind physical and intellectual connections, as Ali was mentioning, which are the basis of the functioning of our society and the way we interact with others. So in some ways, this pandemic has actually made clear some of the points that many urban designers were already, putting out as part of our research outcomes, or activists, non-profit organizations and artists were already, putting in front of decision makers, because we all rely on those people, the decision makers. We can only push them by creating a collective intelligence, I would say, related to public space that is actually highlighting and reinforcing the importance and meaning of public space in our cities. I think we are almost done. I don't know if some of the speakers would like to add something. Yes, David.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on those points about that Laura made about the importance of public space. And I guess one of the things I think that COVID has shown us is that, I mentioned before, people's locality is more important to them. And we know that in the context of social capital, that having access to a space for sociability in and around your community, your neighborhood, and having ownership and decision-making powers about what happens in that space is really vital to people's well-being. And actually during COVID, people found those spaces, or in some communities, whether in the global south or in the global north, and in some of the most poverty-stricken environments that we have in the UK and further afield, people found that value, but also identified the lack of those spaces in many of their communities. And governments and institutional actors need to, I think, respond to the opportunity we have around about experimentation, relaxation of planning regulations, to actually now understand, well, what might be appropriate in spaces that really are beginning to work, maybe underused at the moment, but could become more effectively designed so that they do fulfill that purpose that people really, really demand and really require, I think.
Thank you, David. Ying Feng, do we have questions from the audience? I see a question for Ali, but probably this is also something other speakers would be interested to answer to.
I guess here's the question, but it seems like in all the presentation process, we already answered part of that, and also David answered a lot. And do you think we need to have Ali to answer the question directly to him, or maybe, yeah, because
Ali,
it seems like the...
Yes, Ali, can you read the question from the audience?
I think the respectable colleagues is asking two questions in the same paragraph. One is, what's your understanding, what is your perception of a museum? And I think, as you rightly said, Luisa, that was a very short presentation, but maybe in coming webinars or maybe seminars, and we will see each other physically, hopefully, soon, talk more.
Yes.
But my basic idea is that I see a paradigm shift in the way museums are trying to articulate their relation with the community, in the sense that museum is not a place for sophisticated people anymore. Museum is not only for people to go and to see the work of Picasso and Dali. I think the museum is becoming a more like an agora, a more like a gathering place. And what is more important is that the boundaries surrounding those museums, as I showed you in the example of the Tate Modern in London, or Pompidou Center, or also the Museum of Islamic Art in Qatar, that all of these museums started to make those boundaries so blurred to allow people to go in and out without really realizing that they are in and out. Now, regarding the city as a museum, the gentleman or the wonderful lady is saying, are you trying to make the city, particularly if it's a slum city and poor city, as a spectacle for people? No, I did not mean this at all. I was saying that when we look at the city as a museum, I was stressing that this would be for the city dwellers, not for tourists and travelers. And therefore, it would create a sense of belonging. They will be so proud of what they are doing in their streets and squares, very similar to what Magdalena said regarding this beautiful, beautiful artwork, that it was a message from the community to the medical team. Thank you so much.
And so just to close this webinar, I would like to say that the City Space Architecture is currently establishing the Public Space Museum, which is applying the same concept that Ali just presented today. So you are all invited, speakers and attendees, to come to Bologna in Italy as soon as possible, and to visit our Public Space Museum, which is not a conventional museum, as Ali actually pointed out, but is a space for people to meet, work together, and create, as we said, physical and intellectual human connections. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Thank you all the speakers, and thank you all attendees. Maybe Hendrik, you would like to say something to close?
Well, I think maybe you can still announce afterwards our next session, but as usual, always this second Thursday of the month is always very exciting, I think, for me to see. Now this is the fourth time that we run the session under the same title, and each time I think you feel afterwards a bit more uplifted, and also I was very happy to have a lot of speakers that approached us because we feel like this is a nice session when really people come to us and want to share with others, and to hear from Malaysia and Brazil and Scotland and Poland and Qatar. I think it's a pleasure to listen to all of you. So I think that we still might have one more of those sessions maybe in September. I think we are still kind of continuing this. I don't know what we do afterwards. I think we get probably addicted to this, but on the other hand, I hope that the crisis at some point kind of drizzle out a little bit. So that's from my side. So thanks very much for all the amazing panelists. Very nice to meet you and see your work and your interests. And maybe I give back to Luisa to announce.
Yes, just a few words to announce the next webinar that will take place on Thursday, August the 20th. The title of the webinar is Cities Learning from Pandemics. And we already have confirmed speakers from Hong Kong, Italy, Ecuador, South Africa, and United Kingdom. So I hope you will be with us next Thursday. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.